Hello and welcome into End Alzheimer's. I'm Joe Springer. I'm with Dr. Jeffrey Apter. We have a great interview today with Dr. Apter. Dr. Apter is the founder of Global Medical Institutes. He's the lead principal investigator of Princeton Medical Institutes. He's also the attending physician of Princeton Health Penn Medicine and board member of Alzheimer's New Jersey. We're extremely happy to have him here today to talk about the Simufilam trials. We're not representing Cassava Sciences. This is just talking honestly about what we're seeing, what he's seeing. This is not sanctioned by Cassava or anything like that. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to welcome in Dr. Apter. Hello, Dr. Apter. How are you?
Hi, Joe. Great
Hi.
to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for taking time from your very busy schedule to join us. I really appreciate your time. So I'm going to launch right in. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a clinical psychiatrist and KOL in the Alzheimer field. I've been involved in every approval for Alzheimer's disease to date. And also I've been involved with the Alzheimer Association of New Jersey and now with Alzheimer New Jersey, and published several papers in the area of Alzheimer's research. And also I attend all the major medical meetings in Alzheimer's disease, such as the Clinical Trials in Alzheimer's Disease meeting and ADPD upcoming in Barcelona in March. So looking forward to seeing my colleagues and learning even more about Alzheimer's all the time.
Oh, thank you so very much. Thank you. Okay, and so now you are conducting, amongst other things, you're conducting Simufilam trials. How did you first hear about Simufilam?
Well, I was contacted by my colleague, Dr. James Kupik, who I worked with him previously at his previous pharmaceutical companies. And obviously, he called me and to see if I'd be interested in being part of this study. And I said, of course, I'd be very interested. And we're just about to start the study. So we have our first patients coming in next week. And we're really interested in this study and looking forward to participate as a clinical trial site. Of course, I have no proprietary interest in this or interest in Cassava Pharmaceuticals, but I know Dr. Kupik, who's the chief medical officer and certainly somebody of high proprietary and somebody I trust as far as clinical studies is concerned. And I'm very pleased to be working with the Cassava team.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. And did you say you're about to start the trials? Is that right? You're about to start?
Yeah, we are about to start the trial and recruit patients at our Princeton site. And we'll also soon be able to accommodate patients at our Miami site. And the PI there is Dr. Leonardo Alonso. So we'll be doing the study at both Miami and Princeton, New Jersey.
Excellent. And did you have anything to do with any open labels or anything up until the phase 3s?
No, I haven't. I've only followed this in the literature and at conferences. Some data was presented at the CTAD conference in Boston in November. And of course, I've been reading about it and interested in the study for a while. So we're very pleased to be selected as a research site for the study. And we're really anticipating a good study. And we've had a lot of public interest.
Good.
We have a lot of waiting to come into the study. And if any of your listeners are interested, they can call us and find out about participating in the study as a study participant.
And that's Global Medical Institutes or Princeton Medical Institutes?
Yeah, so we're the Princeton Medical Institute division, and then we also have the Central Miami Institute division. But our number people can call is 609-921-6050, or visit our site at www.princetonmedicalinstitute.com.
PrincetonMedicalInstitute.com. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then how many enrollments? So have you done Alzheimer's trials before? Is that correct?
I've done numerous Alzheimer.
Yes.
I've done over 50 Alzheimer
Oh my
trials in my
gosh. Okay, okay. Oh my gosh, over 50. Oh, okay. So then
yeah,
how yep.
definitely.
So how many new enrollments per month per clinic then is typical for Alzheimer's, and how do you expect these trials to enroll in relation
Well,
to?
we've had a lot of interest. Of course, we were featured in NewJersey.com recently.
Yes, I saw that.
I had a interview. The reporter there is very committed to Alzheimer's and is extremely knowledgeable. And so we have a lot of patients who already called and are put their names on the waiting list for the study. So we're very enthused about it, and so is the New Jersey public as
Yeah.
far as participating in this study.
The New Jersey, very much so. They actually, the New Jersey Pension Board actually became an investor as well. We had a question about restrictions. We actually had a sad story, an understandable story, but a sad one. Someone wanted to enter these trials, but they had cancer, and they had some other restrictions. So can you talk about exclusion criteria or restrictions? We heard about
Yeah,
a patient. Yep.
right. So all studies are conducted according to a protocol. And a protocol is there to ensure not only the success of the study, but also the safety of the participants. And so also you want to have very clean data in the study.
Yes.
So you can't have patients in a study who have active medical diseases that are not stable. Of course, you can have diabetes that stabilize. You can be diabetic and be stable on medication. But usually cancer in the last 5 years is not allowed, except for benign tumors or very early stage tumors that are easily removed. But a squamous cell carcinoma or a squamous cell of the skin would not be a problem to enter a study. And you can have medical problems. But cancer recently, usually in the last 3 to 5 years, is for most of our studies an exclusion. So it's not particular to this study. It's just a general medical exclusion for clinical studies. So, with every protocol we get, there are about 30 exclusionary conditions that cannot be, the patients cannot have being in the study. Of course, they need to have a caregiver, so that if they don't have a caregiver, that's an exclusion. And a caregiver doesn't have to be a family member. Caregiver can just be somebody who visits the patient and knows the patient.
Okay.
It can even be a paid caregiver. It can be a neighbor, can be a spouse, it could be a son or daughter.
Yep.
But every patient coming into a clinical study does require a caregiver to be part of the study. And the caregiver also has to sign the consent form. So sometimes that's an exclusion because they can't find somebody who's prepared to come with them to the visits. But generally, we can get around that by finding somebody in their neighborhood or somebody who can visit them on a regular basis and can report to us on how they're doing. So the reason for the caregiver is to get an objective opinion of how the patient is doing, because with the patient it's himself or herself, you get a very subjective view of how the patient is doing.
Yep, excellent. Thank you. I want to ask you about the data and also some anecdotes. I don't know if you've heard any of the anecdotes. Starting back with Dr. Gonzalez Rojas a year and a half ago,
Mm-hmm.
we heard how the patients, to her surprise, who's also run a lot. Are you familiar with Dr. Gonzalez Rojas? She's
Yeah.
she's also run a number of Alzheimer's studies. And she gave anecdotes to their surprise that they were seeing patients get better. Then we recently talked to Dr. Doug Baker, who's just an ophthalmologist, but he knows 2 patients in the studies, and he had powerful anecdotes. We talked to Hillary Metz, whose father's in the study. She had a powerful anecdote. So I want to ask you about both the data and the anecdotes. First, are you familiar with the anecdotes? We'll talk about the data in a moment, but are you familiar with these stories?
So yeah, I mean, I did listen to your last broadcast with the ophthalmologist,
Yes.
whose patients were in the study. But we have to be very careful
Yes.
as a scientist with anecdotes,
Yes.
and we have to be careful with open label studies. So
Yes.
these are caveats. So unless a study is done rigorously and unless data is collected, we can't pay attention to anecdotes in clinical science. We do have to wear a scientific cap, and we have to have a robust placebo-controlled study to really make comments about the efficacy of the study.
Yep.
So open label studies are informative, especially about side effects and toleration of the drug. But double-blind scientific studies are really the key to getting a drug approved and getting the attention of the scientific community. So you really need that. And we can't really, as scientists, pay attention to anecdotes, although they're very interesting, of course. And studies that don't have a placebo control. So that's been one of the criticisms of some of the studies, but generally the CASAVA is really committed to doing scientific studies. They did have a phase 2 study, which was positive, which is great, which is placebo controlled.
Yes.
And now they have 2 large phase 3 studies with placebo arms and with different dosages of the drug to really inform us if this drug is effective. So we can't really make any comments about the effectiveness of the drug. But what was striking in the phase 2 studies was that there was actually an improvement in cognition. So normally in a study, we're only expecting to see a decrease in decline of the patients in the study.
Right.
But in this phase 2 study, we actually saw patients improving with their cognition, which is quite remarkable because there's no other drug that's in clinical trials right now that actually has shown improvement in cognition. The best we could hope for up to now was less decline than the placebo group. So, that's very remarkable.
Yes.
So that's a very interesting feature of this drug.
Yeah.
The other thing is the safety, the side effect profile is very favorable.
Yes.
So I would encourage patients and families to enter this trial because it's not, there's no brain swelling. There's none of these terrible side effects that you see with the recently approved BIOGEN drug. So there are many positive features to being a participant in the study.
Yes. And
I think it's a very attractive study. But again, as I said, we have to wear our scientific hat, and we can't really make comments about efficacy until these phase 3 studies are well underway.
Yep. And I think that you sound a lot like Mr. Barbier and CASAVA. They said we have to do phase 3 studies, of course, large placebo-controlled phase 3 studies, but that it was very interesting. And they didn't try to say this proves everything, but they thought it was very interesting as well. Yep. And one thing, as you then brought it down to encouraging people to get into the studies because it's very safe. I did want to perhaps point to the anecdotal evidence having value there because there's a campaign to say that this is not safe. Are you familiar with a campaign to try to keep patients from entering the trials, perhaps a financially driven campaign to keep patients to be afraid of these trials?
Yeah, of course. I've read of some of these anecdotes and of some of these complaints, and I don't know what the basis of them. I can't think scientifically where this is coming from. In your last interview, you had suggested some big pharmaceutical company may be trying to suppress this, but I don't know that. And I wouldn't base any comments on that. I would think that the company will do what's correct. It's a very ethical company, and I don't think there's been any wrongdoing. And I think, the company's been punished by Wall Street and by some investors, but I generally want to be open-minded, and I want to conduct and be part of the scientific study to prove whether the drug is effective. We pretty much by now know from all the patients that have been in it that there's no harm. And the first principle in medicine is do no harm. Mm-hmm. So that's the most important thing. So by participating in the study, patients will be able to help advance this drug, get a drug free of charge, get all the evaluations at no charge. Yeah. And of course, the patients coming into the study do get paid if they qualify. Oh. So they have to have the right criteria to get into the study. And we talked about exclusion criteria, but there are also a lot of inclusion criteria. So not everybody who calls would be able to enter the study. They have to be in the right mini-mental, which is the score from 0 to 30, where 30 out of 30 is probably neither of us on a good day, but if they score too high or too low,
Yeah.
then they can't get into the study. So there are several criteria for entry into the study.
Yep.
So not everybody who quals. Fortunately, we have other good studies that if they don't qualify for this study, patients can enter another study. And of course, the area of Alzheimer's disease is very broad.
Yes.
And there are many studies going on, thankfully.
Yes.
And our site was one of the founding sites of the Global Alzheimer Platform.
Oh.
And the goal of the Global Alzheimer Platform would be to get a good drug approved for Alzheimer's disease by the year 2025. And so for that criteria, the drug already has to be in clinical trials.
Yes.
A drug was recently approved, which I think was a wrong decision. I think that drug did not merit the approval because it did not meet the criteria of clinical improvement. It moved the biomarkers, but that's not enough. So what Cassava has to show is that their drug not only moves the biomarkers, which actually they have shown in their open label studies and in their, because to move biomarkers, the drug has to be, is showing effectiveness in moving the biomarkers,
Yes.
whether there's a placebo group or not.
Right.
But also what we want to show is a clinical benefit of the drug.
Yes. Yes.
So we have clinical measures in the studies, which not only measures the patient's cognition, but also measures the caregiver's assessment of how the patient is doing.
Interesting.
So we have those composite scores, and they have to show improvement in their activities of daily living, their cognition. So the bar is pretty high for a drug to get approved for Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
And I don't know why the FDA lowered their standard for one particular drug. It's still a mystery to me. But this drug will go through the proper channels, and hopefully it will get approved.
Yep.
But there's never a guarantee.
No, there's no guarantee. You had said you want to keep an open mind. You think the drug is safe, and you want to run the trials and see. And there's a lot of people, and you had mentioned there's a lot of people that are passionate about this. There's a lot of people watching that are very passionate about this and would like to help you enroll the trials, like to help in general with the cause. So is it helpful for us to spread the word on social media in our family circles to get more people to the clinics to enroll in the trial? Or what is the best way for the people watching that want to help you to help you?
Yeah, I mean, I would go to clinicalstudies.gov and look up go under Alzheimer's and look at all the clinical research sites that are performing this study. I mean, we also have patients who come in just for study visits, even from Florida or from California. They fly in for some of their study visits to New Jersey. And Princeton, New Jersey is a very nice place, lots of nice places to stay.
Yeah.
So some patients come in just for the study.
Wow.
But they do have to make, the visits, once a month. And we have to follow them during the study.
Yep. Okay, great.
But what's nice about the study, where else? I have a colleague, Joyce Kramer at Yale, who wrote a book about clinical trials. And she said the best medical care you can get in America is through participating in a clinical trial. Because where else do you see a board-certified doctor at every visit? You get blood work, EKGs, MRIs, PET scans.
Yeah.
And these are not covered by Medicare,
Right,
especially the PET scans.
Right.
So everything is paid for. And of course, there's also a travel stipend for the people and for the time and travel who come in for the study.
Yes.
So it's really a win-win situation when
Yes.
you enter a study, because these are drugs that you can't get over the internet or at a pharmacy.
That's right.
And so by participating in a clinical trial, you're not only helping yourself, but you are helping other patients gain access to drugs that do work. So participating in a clinical trial, most people do it for altruistic reasons, just to help the field. And that's very important as well. But we are looking for something that will help improve cognition, as this drug has shown to do, and also delay the progression of this illness, as this drug has been shown to do in phase 2.
Yes.
So as I said, we need larger numbers of patients to make it more significant. And we do have to have positive results in these phase 3 studies to get FDA approval.
And yep, completely agreed. Thank you very much. And then I wanted to talk about the method of action because, like the Biogen drug and like a number of other monoclonal antibodies, that is the
Mhm,
amyloid hypothesis, removing the amyloid plaques and just sort of hoping that that has an effect. This is a complete, and that
mhm.
was for a long time dominated the industry and the research and then the discussion. And so this is a completely different method of action. Can you speak about the method of action and what your take on it is?
Well, this is a drug that targets a misplaced filament called filament A. And because in Alzheimer's disease, there is a genetic predisposition to this disease, and the genetics will kind of foster the development through A beta 42, which is the bad protein
Yes.
of this filament A. And what Simufilam does, it corrects this formation of the filament A and prevents the drug from binding to these acetylcholine receptors, which produce something worse than amyloid, which is tau. So this is basically an anti-tau drug and prevents the propagation of tau through the brain, which may cause Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
So amyloid is important. Tau is probably a lot more important.
Interesting.
And I think that this drug seems to have the right properties to prevent Alzheimer's from progressing.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the tau tang, so the amyloid is an interesting thing, but the tau tangles, we know that the amyloid by itself is not enough. That some people have the amyloid, but they don't have the Alzheimer's. Right. So very interesting. Thank you.
Right.
And then you talked importantly about safety. You talked importantly about what it takes to qualify for approval. And in the case of Biogen, I'd like to ask you about breakthrough therapy designation. There's two requirements for it. It has to be a serious or deadly disease for one, and then it has to have preliminary clinical evidence that it's better than what's out there, what's available. And it seems to me that based on there's the year-long open label, there's no, as you said, there's over a decade. I think they've had like 150,000 doses by now with no safety concerns. So it seems to me that, and then with all the suggestion of that it might work, not that it's proven at all, but the suggestion that it might and that it's safe, and then the fact that there's nothing else out there in an always fatal disease, it seems like they potentially could qualify for breakthrough therapy designation. Do you have a take on that?
I don't really. That depends on their negotiations ahead with the FDA.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to go to the FDA and you have to qualify for that. And obviously, they're going through the whole process. They're doing two expensive, long phase 3 studies.
Yep.
And that's really the goal, is to get those studies done and then go to the FDA with the full data. I don't know if they need any breakthrough therapy designation. They just have to show that their drug is effective.
Yes. Okay. You can, and as you say, they have already started phase 3. So sometimes in like
Right.
cancers, yep, and sometimes in cancers, breakthrough therapy has even been awarded in phase 1 sometimes. So it maybe that's not even as consequential. Then may I ask you one more thing? You said you had you were involved. Were you involved with Aricept, the donepezil approval?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why I've been in Alzheimer's research for so long. I was involved in Cognex, Aricept, Namenda, Exelon since the early days. So, and of course, that was 25 years ago. And in 25 years, we haven't had a good drug approved for Alzheimer's disease. And so that's why I get very excited by some of these new mechanisms of action and new drugs that we're working with. And we are working with several new drugs that look very promising, but we don't know till the studies reads out, whether the drug is effective.
Yep.
And we can't go by anecdotal evidence. We can't go by. We have to wait and see what the results will be. But we're very encouraged.
Yes.
We're encouraged by the safety.
Yes.
We're encouraged by the fact that the drug didn't have any safety issues, and that it did improve cognition early on. And none of the other drugs actually have shown that. And also that it may, most important, is to prevent progression of Alzheimer's disease.
Yes.
So that's the reason why clinical trials are so long, because you really need at least 18 months to show that the drug is delaying progression of a disease.
Well, may I ask you about that, Dr. Apter? Because one thing I've been hopeful about is that with Aricept, it was tested for 18 months. However, it did very well, or did well after 6 months. But then it did pretty terribly. It fell off precipitously, and patients did as poorly as if they had never taken anything over 18 months. So you have a drug that works for 6 months and then fails, and it was approved. I wonder if Simufilam is looked in at 6 months and it's working and it's safe, is there a case to move patients' compassionate use from placebo to drug, effectively ending those trials at 6 months because that's all that's required for approval in a fatal disease?
Well, I think they will do an interim analysis and they will consult with the FDA. As I mentioned to you earlier, you have to have pre-negotiated endpoint for presenting to the FDA. So they would have to have had that pre-negotiated. You can't just, unless it's really dramatic, really, really dramatic, it would be hard to go back to the FDA before that. The Aricept studies actually were 3 months and 6 months. And patients did sustain improvement as long as they stayed on Aricept. So it was only when they stopped the Aricept at the end of the study that the patients declined back to where they would have been as if they'd never taken Aricept. So it's not like the Aricept stopped working after 6 months.
Okay.
It did work after 6 months if patients stayed on it. It doesn't work forever though. So
I see.
as patients
So it does
decline
fall off.
more and more their Alzheimer's, and Aricept doesn't prevent progression of the illness. It's what we call a symptomatic drug.
Yes.
So Simufilam has the best properties of both worlds. It works as a symptomatic drug, in that what we mean, it actually improves the mini-mental of patients currently taking it and the ADAS-Cog score. And then it also may prevent progression of the disease. So this is really something that's very important. And for those studies, you really need the 18 months
Yes.
to show that the drug prevents progression of illness.
Okay. So now you just followed up with those studies. You need 18 months, but I wanted to grab onto something else you said, is that if they came back with something dramatic at 6 months, it might be a different story. Well, what they have preliminarily, what is suggested by the phase 2s is dramatic. Would that qualify as dramatic to you if it's replicated?
So as I mentioned, it's really going to depend on what was preordained with the FDA.
Yes. Okay.
And when they can go back to the FDA.
Yep.
I think it's highly unlikely that they would get qualified before the studies are done.
Okay.
I think they really have to do these rigorous studies and then go back to the FDA and show the data.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
I don't think any drug is going to be approved as dramatic unless you can really prove it.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. And then, so I appreciate everything you've said so much. Do you have, we have a number of questions coming in. Do you have a few minutes for questions from the chat?
Oh,
thank you
sure.
very much. Great. Wow, we have a lot of questions. Okay. Okay, so Charlotte Chang has a question, because the phase 2 has been encouraging. We're wondering how likely is it that we'll then see something much different in phase 3. So Charlotte says, based on your expertise and past experiences with all of these Alzheimer's trials, what is your educated guess on the odds of encouraging phase 2 data not resulting in good phase 3 results for Alzheimer's drugs in general, and then which we know has been a graveyard, but how about for Simufilam in particular?
Well, I think that based on the results of the phase 2A study, which showed positive results, and the phase 2B study, we do hope that the phase 3 will be positive. But as I said, you need a large number of patients for a sufficient amount of time, and so we shouldn't jump to any conclusions based on the phase 2 data.
Yep, understood. Yep, thank you. And then we talked about, and now we talked about not being scientific. We talked about being scientific, but then we also talked about, it was very interesting also, the anecdotes. Have you spoken to other clinicians who've been prescribed? I know you're only about to begin. Have you had other conversations with physicians that have been prescribing?
Well, not specific. I've attended sessions with other investigators, and investigators have been part of the study, but I think it'd be too premature to discuss, as I said, kind of anecdotal talks about that.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
But, in the phase 2 study, which is very encouraging and the drug did move the biomarkers, and, the Biogen drug was approved mostly on the biomarker results. So in the summary of results on the cerebrospinal fluid biomarkers, we did see robust improvement in the biomarkers.
An entire panel repeatedly did the phase 2A, the 2B, and then the continuation open label. Yeah. Okay, and then there's, as far as a timeline, an interesting thing about how this drug works is, as you said, it's that protein, filament A. So Daily Mix says, what makes a patient accept at these trials after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's? What's the timeline? We're asking, what's the timeline for a response? We've heard different things on this. Do you have a notion of a drug with this method of action, of what the timeline might be for a response?
So the timeline is a very interesting question because, if we look at the memory effects that we did in the phase 2 study, we did see an improvement in a short period of time on the episodic memory improvement and spatial working memory improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So, those can be detected fairly early. We're talking about the symptomatic effect of the drug.
Yep.
So, after 6 months, there was, an improvement in the ADAS-Cog 11. 9 months and 12 months, that constantly, it was an incremental increase. So,
yes,
you got a 0.1, 0.5 change in the ADAS-Cog after 6 months, and a 3 point after 9 months.
yes.
So it seems like 9 months was pretty critical for this change in the ADAS-Cog.
Yes, and I think it improved a little further at the 12-month point as well.
It did.
Yes.
It went above the -3.
And then we've seen in small molecules that target misfolded proteins that is. I looked at a study that looked at a number of them, and they all, the ones that had long-term studies, all of them, there were 7 that the study looked at. 4 of them had long-term studies, like 2.5 years, and all of them got an increasing benefit over time. So is that something we could possibly, and that would be, and what we're seeing, like you just said, those numbers at 6, 9, and 12 months, this isn't a disease of continual decline where just staying steady would represent continual increase. Yeah. Is it a possibility that patients could continue to get better?
Yeah, definitely. We definitely see, as we said, a more improvement after 1 year than after 6 months, and definitely much more after 6 months than after 3 months.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Thank you.
Those were all significantly improved.
Yes. And there's the behavior as well. Do you have any comments on, for some people for some people, as far as especially the caretakers, the behavioral issues can be the bigger thing. There's been not as much data, but some interesting data as well there. Do you weight that data at all, or have you looked at that data?
Behavioral issue problems in Alzheimer's disease is really what pushes people into a nursing home. So yes. Any drug that can change it, it's not the memory that puts people into a nursing home, it's the behavioral, the agitation, the biting, the screaming, the throwing. If those behaviors can indeed be improved by this drug, it would save a lot of money because nursing home placement is really the biggest cost in Alzheimer's disease. So we're always looking at, behavioral measures of a drug and behavioral measures to see if the drug is improving those.
Yes. I remember seeing a study that it was around 2019 that if you paid all the caretakers like $13 an hour, then along with all of the direct spending as well in Alzheimer's, everything in Alzheimer's came to like 3% of GDP, Alzheimer's spending. So, yeah, and it's set to get much, much larger. So, wow. Speaking of
it's really frightening.
And then speaking of the spending, we talked about the Biogen approval, and now the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services are sort of trying to, almost a backdoor disapproval in that they're saying they would only cover it for trials, which some people are for. There's like the Cleveland Clinic and Mount Sinai, I think, categorically said we're not administering this at all. They didn't think it was a good therapy. Do you have any comment about what the CMS is doing, or if Biogen will be successful to change their minds?
Well, I kind of agree with what they're doing. I don't think that based on the scientific evidence, even the scientific advisory committee of FDA disagreed with the FDA findings. So
and resigned.
Yeah, there were a few resignations in addition. So that kind of smacks more of misconduct than anything we heard about with this drug. So I think the company here has been very ethical, and they're not saying this drug is the greatest thing on earth. They're just saying,
yes,
we're very optimistic. We want to see how the drug works in clinical trials, and that's what I want to see. I mean, I'm totally objective. I'm not going into the study saying to patients the drug is going to work. We have to say it's a clinical trial. You may get the drug, you may get the placebo, and we have to see how you do in the study. There's no guarantees, but this is definitely a study I would refer a family member into. So, I feel very positive about the study design, the study outcome, and the safety of the drug. So, there's no good reason for a patient not to enter the study.
Thank you so much. Yep.
I would really kind of poo-poo all the negative comments because I don't think they're based on any facts. I don't think there's been any wrongdoing on the part of the pharmaceutical sponsor. I think we just need to get down and do the study and then present the results, whatever they are, positive or negative. But we would definitely encourage people to enter the study because we have scientific questions we have to answer about the study, and that's what's important.
Yes, and I completely agree with you. And you want to get down and do the study and stick to the facts and the data. And I think there's a lot of people that agree with you. Now, I know in our Alzheimer's community there are people that are concerned with what happened with Provenge. If you're familiar, was an end-line treatment for prostate cancer, and then seemingly because of possible corruption at the FDA, shorts and hedge funds were able to keep it off of the market for a while, and so again, getting to the point of we'd like to just get down and just get to the data. But I know there's a lot of concern that there will be, and then we saw this confusing approval of BioGen's drug. So is everything up to snuff at the FDA? So the question, so we have a question here. Michael's asking, have you ever worked with a promising drug that was snubbed out before by big pharma or by competition, and what could have been done differently? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Provenge story or not, or other. I've heard that there's others in that line. Have you ever seen any of that?
Not personally. So none of the drugs I've worked on, I haven't seen that. The drugs either failed or they passed, and we just need studies that are positive and move forward with that.
Yep. Agreed. Yep. Thank you. And then we talked about the method of action with Simufilam, and then the interesting way that it has had suggested a continuing increased benefits suggested. But then there's the interesting CMS. So after the 12-month open label, unrelated to the phase 3 study. After the 12-month open label, which is ongoing right now, patients are then being randomized 6-month placebo or 6 months drug. And so the question here from P. Sigarn is, thank you so much, Dr. Apter. By the way, so many thank yous, Dr. Apter. So many thank yous in the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this talk. What are the chances that patients who are taken off Simufilam for 6 months will start going down as composed to those who continue? So the concern is that there could be a lasting effect. And then this CMS trial, because the drug works so well, might actually show that there's not a whole lot of separation between drug and placebo. Is that a legitimate concern?
Not really. So this is what we call a randomized withdrawal design, which is an acceptable scientific treatment. So you what we call an enriched study. So you have all the patients who responded, and then you re-randomize them to drug or placebo. And you would expect the placebo group to decline, whereas the patients who stay on drug to continue to improve or not to decline. And that's an acceptable study design, and that's acceptable to the FDA as a clinical trial. So there's nothing wrong with that as a clinical design, and the proof will be in the pudding. We have to see how that works in the study. Yeah.
Somebody's asking about the antibody treatments. There's the monoclonal antibodies, and there's a number of others, and there's concerns. Are they going to try to crowd out other treatments? Have you seen any? It seems to me that they're all similar to what Biogen and Lilly have. Is that about right? Have you seen anything more? Is that unfair, or is that fair as far as the monoclonal antibodies? Are they all about what Biogen and Lilly have, and about the same value, same method of action?
Well, no, there are two monoclonal antibodies that are going to the FDA shortly, and hopefully they'll present clinical data that is more positive. And I have no objection to a drug being approved if it can show biomarker change and clinical benefit. Right. But they also have to show, so Lilly's going to the FDA, Eisai's going to the FDA, and they have to show that their drug produces clinical improvement in order to get FDA approval, unless they kind of stick to the same guidelines as Biogen and don't need the clinical improvement. But these drugs do look a little better from the data I've seen. We're also working with some anti-tau antibody studies right now, and they seem very, very interesting. And other couple of studies that we're working on, which are non-amyloid approaches, seem very promising. So everybody who comes into a study here, we assess which study they can fit best. So this study may not be for everybody, but there may be another study we have that is suitable. So I think we have to be open-minded. As I said, there's not one study that's going to be good for every patient, or that every patient is going to qualify for. So there are a number of interesting studies that we're running, and we just hope to get more patients into clinical trials. I think that's the goal of the Global Alzheimer Platform, GAP, is to get more patients to shoot on goal, as we say.
Yes.
So the more shoot on goal, the more chances you have of scoring, and the more drugs you have in development, and the more patients you have in the clinical trial, the more drugs we can get approved. And some will fail, and some will pass. But the first patient to be cured of Alzheimer's disease will be a patient in a clinical trial.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. Yeah. And you had mentioned the tau in your NewJersey.com article, that the tau, you're talking about perhaps, maybe there's a few, but there's, I guess, Janssen has a drug in trials that you're And what phase, is that phase 2, I guess, or what are they?
That's phase 2, but that's also a very promising drug. Yes. It works, an antibody, which is really, I think the target, they really have scientifically engaged the tau target. Some other anti-tau drugs have failed, but this one looks very promising. And, that's, for this study, patients have to be PET positive. They have to have the amyloid positive in order to get into the study. And it's a very interesting study, the Janssen antibody study.
Can I ask, so the antibody in amyloid's case is, I think, carrying the amyloid away. Are they carrying the tau tangles away or stabilizing the tau, or what's the antibody doing in this case?
Same thing. So you're seeing a you're seeing a decrease in the amount of tau in the brain.
Okay.
Which would be a decrease in the amount of tangles in the brain. And also, tau kind of promotes the production of amyloid. Okay. So you would also see a decrease in amyloid.
So maybe more upstream.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's an upstream effect of an anti-tau antibody.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Yep. Great. Thank you. And then here's an interesting question. Because you rightfully say we must conduct these large placebo-controlled trials, rightfully so. But nevertheless, here's an interesting question. While your scientific approach with the placebo arm is the gold standard, given the number of studies, I think you said you've been involved in 50 studies with Alzheimer's. Given the number of studies,
over the years, yeah. But at this present time, yeah.
So given the number of studies that have looked at Alzheimer's decline, don't we know what the placebo arm should look like by now? Do we really have
well, you can't really transfer one placebo group from another. You can superimpose it when you're looking at it, but you really need to conduct a rigorous trial. You need to have the placebo arm in the clinical study.
Yep, fair. Yep, agreed. Yep. And there are good considerations why one placebo group is not the same as another.
Right.
Would now you could speak about that better than I could. Could you name a couple of things why that would be?
Well, you do have to have the placebo group matched with the study group. So you have to have a similar age, similar demographics, race, ApoE4 status. There are many different things that we may want to figure in. And you have to make sure that the placebo group is matched with the study group. So we always look at the figures of how many patients, what age they were, the placebo group and the study group, all those variants. So you want to make sure the variants are very similar with the placebo group and the active treatment group.
And then Randy's asking about timing here. Assuming enrollment goes as scheduled, and in general, I think we're kind of curious, how long should we expect these trials to take to enroll? His question here is, assuming it goes as scheduled, what point should we be made aware of positive and negative results? Or I guess, how long should it take should we expect to get these trials fully enrolled is also the question.
Well, we expect the study to enroll over a period of a year. So that'll take us to the end of 2022. And then, of course, you have patients in there for 18 months. So that's middle of 2024. So by 2025, we would expect results.
So are you running Refocus then and not Rethink? I believe Refocus is the 18-month and Rethink is the 12-month?
We're doing the 18-month, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you're running the 18-month, which is longer and started afterward. Then how about, is there a chance... Yep. Is there a chance that the shorter study that it started enrolling in November, is there a chance that could lead to this drug starting the approval process and then having trials be confirmatory? Again, given the fact that this is an always fatal disease.
Right. Well, it's going to depend on the results and what the understanding is and agreement that Cassava has with the FDA as far as what's needed. Normally, the normal criteria are 2 phase 3 studies, and sometimes a phase 2 study can count as one of them. So that really depends on what's been pre-negotiated with the FDA. Yeah, I mean, if you have dramatic results with one study and you have a positive phase 2 study, you may be able to go earlier to the FDA.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay.
So you may not have to wait, but that all depends on many variables. So it's not set in stone that you can do that.
Yep. Thank you. And as I'm scrolling through here, just many people thanking you for your precious time, and it's a lot of people just saying how very valuable your insights are. A lot of the stuff you're
Thank you.
saying, yep, a lot of your stuff you're saying, we've all been wondering about for a long time. So yeah, this is just extremely valuable for a lot of us. Thank you.
Mhm.
Now you had mentioned this, but there is still a chance that these trials are stopped. And there's a citizens petition open with the FDA right now, filed to stop these trials. And so the question is, how would you feel if the FDA gave in to this request?
Well, I, I, I would doubt, first of all, I would doubt that the FDA would, I mean, they would have to show malfeasance on behalf of the pharmaceutical company. I would not, I would be very surprised, in fact, shocked if the FDA stopped these trials.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then did you say how many people you're expecting to enroll your at Princeton yourselves?
Well, we're hoping for 10 to 20 patients at my site.
Yep. And then have you seen, are you in this or just in general, are there COVID headwinds, or are those about over these days, or?
Not entirely. There's still a little reluctance, especially with the new strains for people coming in. So that does impact us. But on the other hand, we just did a statewide screening in our office that was actually spearheaded by GAP and Tony Deering from NJ.com,
Right.
who helped us gather. And we screened it between 3 locations, over 1,000 patients. So people are very interested in being screened. We also do offer screening for anybody who wants it, whether they want to come into a study or not. We offer that as a public service. So if anybody wants to come in and get screened, we can do that at no charge to them.
Excellent.
And we do that every day in our office.
Excellent.
And they don't have to enter a clinical trial to come in for a screening. Now, memory screening is very important to do, and any doctor can do it. And in fact, they can even now be reimbursed by Medicare for memory screening. We don't even bother submitting to Medicare. We just do it as a public service.
Oh,
And anybody who wants to be screened can call us
good for you.
or go on our website and enroll for a memory screen.
Wow.
And that's something you should do once a year after age 65, is just have your memory checked. And then we check it again, every 6 months to a year, depending on the patient's progress.
May I ask you, now that you said that, to check every year, once a year, and now Cassava is also getting funding from the National Institute on Aging for Savadex,
Right.
right, which is a potentially very exciting blood test, which could possibly tell you ahead of time, before you have symptoms, maybe, possibly, that you could have Alzheimer's happening. Can you comment about if that? I don't know if you've looked at the data around that or not. So I think something was published on December 31st, as a matter of fact. But have you looked at the data? Yep. Have you looked at the data around that? And yep.
Yeah, very interesting data. There are several companies that have advanced testing
Yep.
For Alzheimer's and a blood test.
Yep.
So, in the old days, we had to do a postmortem, then we had to do spinal fluid. More recently, we've had to do PET scans.
Yep.
But the blood test may obviate all of that, and we may be able to test people in large numbers for Alzheimer's disease to see if they have the genetic positive test.
Yeah.
And it measures the amount of amyloid and tau by a blood test.
Yeah.
And so that is really something that we're incorporating into some of our clinical studies that are starting up now.
Thank you very much.
And the fact that the Cassava is running this study in tandem with National Institute of Aging really gives it, National Institute of Aging is pretty strict about who they will fund.
Yeah.
So the naysayers, why would the National Institute of Aging want to sponsor this study? Yes. if the drug is not promising?
And they've gotten almost $30 million from them by now as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has to have scientific merit. The company has to be reputable. So this kind of speaks against all the bad press
Yep.
that cassava has unnecessarily got. Um,
Yep. Agreed.
so, we're looking forward to positive data and even negative data if that's the case, but we just want to have data, and we want to have patients come into the clinical trial. As I said, I think we feel very positive about this clinical trial. We'd encourage everybody who's thinking about a clinical trial to enter this or go to a center that does clinical trials and see if you qualify for one of these studies. And, this is one of our best studies, but we have other good studies as well.
Yep. Thank you very much. And then that was PrincetonMedicalInstitutes.com.
Yeah.
PrincetonMedicalInstitutes.com, and that's how you can
Right.
get screened. So thank you so much.
Right.
Yep. Thank you very
Sure.
much. And then how about, can you have one last question? You have one last question in you? You've given us an hour of your time. We have a question from a doctor here. Do you have time for one last question?
Of course.
Thank you so much. So Subri Abdelhadi says, thank you, Dr. Apter. How much of an impact do you think neuroinflammation has on Alzheimer's disease as etiology? And do you think that amyloid is rather a byproduct of the disease rather than a cause? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question because, amyloid may be the gravestone.
Right.
And not the amyloid may just be a marker of Alzheimer's disease. And we do think neuroinflammation is important. And this drug particularly does have a anti-inflammatory effect. We think that's important. We don't know if amyloid is just the end product. Some people have called it the tombstone of Alzheimer's disease. And we don't know, what the actual cause of Alzheimer's disease is to this day. But it is a genetically modified neuroinflammatory process. And we can think of Alzheimer's as the neuroinflammation of the brain or the diabetes of the brain. We know that anti-diabetic drugs help in Alzheimer's disease and are currently in clinical trials as well.
Is it because of the inflammation? The diabetes drugs, do they help directly because of the inflammation?
So yeah, they we can think of diabetes and Alzheimer's disease as inflammatory disease.
Okay.
And so, anti-glucose drugs and anti-inflammatory drugs have been tried, not very successfully, but it may be too late to use new anti-inflammatory drugs once the patients have developed Alzheimer's disease. But retrospectively, people who've taken anti-inflammatories do have a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Same as people who've taken lipid-lowering agents.
And perhaps and Viagra as well. Do you have any comment on that?
Not really. I've seen the reports. I just don't know the scientific basis well enough to really make an informed.
Yep. Interesting. I guess blood flow.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Apter, I can't thank you enough. Just about every single word out of your mouth has been so enlightening. Things our community has been talking about so much, and we've just needed to speak with an expert like yourself. I just can't thank you enough for giving us an entire hour of your time. And also on behalf of the hundreds of people saying thank you. So we had like more than 350 people at one point. So thank you so much. Yeah. And then there'll be thousands. Yep. So there'll be thousands. So thank you so much for your time. You've said so much. Do you have anything else before we go?
No, we're just encouraged by some of the clinical trials that are going on. We're looking forward to processing the study and participating.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Maybe we'll invite you back after maybe some more news or after some time has passed and things.
Absolutely.
But you always, of course, you can come on every single day that you would like to. But maybe we can get you back after some time. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Terrific talking to you. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, that was amazing. That was a really terrific interview with Dr. Apter. I'm going to end it there. Dr. Apter, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone participating in the chat. Terrific chat. Maybe on the other site tomorrow, we will dissect this interview, but I'll end it there. Thank you guys so much. Thanks, everyone.